Monday, October 20th, 2014, and seeing as it's Dad is about a month away from turning 90, we thought for this auspicious occasion we'd get him on camera and ask him some questions. Say hello to the folks.
Hello, hello.
Yeah.
I can hardly believe I'm almost 90, but I'll take it when I can.
What I was wondering, what's your earliest memory?
I think my earliest memory was about I was about 3 years old, and we were in Palouse, Washington, in eastern Washington, and I think I remember standing on a stool, and I was helping Mother wash dishes, and I felt so big. I'm sure I wasn't much help, but that's one of my earliest. I also have a memory of that time. That was eastern Washington, where it was pretty cold in the winter, and Dad had an old Model T Ford touring car, and I remember during the winter he jacked it up and put it on blocks and took the battery down to a garage to keep it from freezing during the winter.
So you wouldn't use the car all winter, huh?
Right. Right, it was a small town. I think I remember a sleigh on snow, but I can't be sure of that.
Wow, that's really something. And what part of the state was this?
This was eastern Washington. I was born in Tico, which is on the Idaho border, about 70 miles southeast of Spokane. And then we moved to Palouse, and this was all wheat country.
Yeah, and this Palouse, I don't even think I've ever heard of it. It's pretty small too.
Well, it is. I think it was bigger than Tico, but I don't remember for sure, of course.
And your dad had a church there?
He had a church there, and then we moved to Puyallup, which is a suburb of Tacoma. And I had twin brothers 2 years older than I, Ralph and Raymond, and they started school in Palouse. Carolyn, who was born 2 years after me, and I both started elementary school in Puyallup. And of course I have more memories there. And then our younger sister, Emily, was born while we were in Puyallup. So that was an important place. And we lived there about 4 years.
Now, what church was it there for Grandpa?
Yeah, it was a Christian church in Puyallup. And of course the Depression hit, and I think they'd been paying Dad $100 a week, and then of course they couldn't keep doing that. And I remember he took a portion of the offering or something, and I remember one week he got $6.
Wow.
So, we couldn't afford to do that. One of my memories in Puyallup, well, a lot of them actually, but one of them was seeing Franklin Roosevelt in his first campaign. It had to be 1932, and I wasn't yet 8. And there was a Western Washington State Fairgrounds in Puyallup, and Dad was the ticket taker in the grandstand and let me in. I assume my siblings were there, but I don't remember. And I remember seeing Franklin Roosevelt in this open touring car go around the infield and waving to people. How much I actually remember and how much of it fits in with pictures since then, I don't know, but I do remember that occasion.
You told me once your parents were not very keen on FDR.
No, my mother's family especially grew up Republican. Her father had been a county sheriff and county judge in Oregon, and then went back to farming. And of course they were very anti-repeal of prohibition. And one of my early memories of politics was jumping on and off a running board of a car, distributing leaflets opposing the repeal of prohibition. And of course they said that Roosevelt came in on a beer wagon, and but we had the NRA, National Recovery Act, a sign in our window, we do our part, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so you stayed, where were you through the Depression? Where did you live?
Well, mostly in Puyallup, but then when the church couldn't pay Dad, he went to work for Curtis Publishing Company, Ladies' Home Journal, Country Gentleman, Saturday Evening Post.
Wow.
And we moved to Tacoma, and my brother Raymond and I sold these magazines for him and made a few pennies. We sold the Saturday Evening Post for a nickel and the Ladies' Home Journal for a dime.
What did your dad do?
He was like a circulation man, and he had a number of boys doing what we did.
Right, like a paper route, kind of a newspaper route.
Yeah,
Nice.
Except ours were just individual sales. It wasn't a regular route.
Was he just staying in Tacoma and driving the Model T around, or?
Well, he had by then, while we were still in Puyallup, he traded in the Model T and got a 1927 Buick sedan. And that seemed luxurious with the velour, the upholstery and the doors that closed quietly. And the neighbors said they couldn't hear him come home at night like they did in the Model T.
Wow, interesting. And so you bought that just before the Depression hit? Was that kind of the deal then?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. We lived in 3 houses in Puyallup, and this was the middle house where we lived when Emily was born. So it probably was, if not just before the Depression hit, before it hit us that hard.
And then I remember you went to high school in Camas, Washington, right?
Right. We moved from Tacoma to Southern Oregon, where Dad had a real bad bout with arthritis or rheumatism, I don't know what they called it. And the doctors put him on citrus fruit, and we used to buy grapefruit by the half case, which seemed like a lot to me. And the doctor said we needed to move to Southern Oregon or California, where it was drier and warmer.
Oh.
And his uncle had a farm outside of Roseburg in Southern Oregon, so we went down there. And then as he got more sunshine and got more able, we moved to a very small town, and it used to be what we called a student preaching point. Somebody from Eugene would come down and preach on weekends, and we moved there with that understanding, and then he got back into more full-time. And then we moved 5 years to 5 miles to another small town called Drain, and I went through 9th grade in Drain, and Ralph and Raymond went through the 11th grade, and then we went to Camas, Washington, which is on the Columbia River, just east of Vancouver, across from Portland.
Right.
That was a paper mill town, and that's where my brothers graduated, and I graduated from high school.
I remember when we flew into Portland that one time years ago that you pointed out the old Weyerhaeuser, wasn't it? The paper mill?
Paper mill.
And you worked there some?
All of it. Well, Emily didn't, but my brothers and Carolyn and I all worked at the paper mill.
What kind of jobs?
Well, I started out my first summer, and of course the war was on, or getting there, and they were losing helpers, so they had room for people like me, and they had increased the wages up to 85 cents an hour then, which was really big because it had been less before.
Yeah.
My first summer there, I worked, and I guess this was after first summer after I graduated. worked in what they called the print factory, and they had fruit wrap paper.
Oh.
They would bring in on forklifts and stuff, and I worked with another fellow who ran the cutter, and we would take about 5 reams of that and scoot it from the hoist over to the cutter, and then he would throw down the arm and press it down and cut it in, and then I was known as a string tire.
Yeah.
He would move those, by then 10 reams down the steel place there over the string, and I would do something like this.
Yeah.
And tie it, and I had a little knife on my finger to cut it.
Wow.
The second summer, after I'd had a year in college, I worked on the number 6 paper machine, which was the largest machine in the factory, and they did brown craft paper, and we were on the rewind, this huge machine, almost a block long, and then it'd come off and the hoist would take it and put it on the rewind, and we would put cores down for them to wrap around and cut at different lengths. And I would take it off there. There was a fella who ran that, and then I would put it off on a 2-wheel hand truck and pick that up and take it off to the warehouse. And I learned to handle anywhere from 400 to 1,000 pound rolls.
Wow.
One of the older men who was really rather wiry and small said, "Here, let me show you how. You don't lift with your back, you lift with your legs."
Right.
You know, and so I learned to do that pretty well.
That's good advice still
Yeah.
today.
I had a friend on another machine who didn't work as fast as me, so he had more leisure time between loads, and he saw me hurrying back from the warehouse one time sweating, and he said, "Don, when you get to be an old fat preacher, there's nothing to do but go around and hold the old lady's hands. I'll tell them I knew you when you worked for a living."
That's right. Well, I don't think I've heard that story. That's a great one. When this was during the war?
Yes, yeah, I graduated high school in 1942.
Yeah.
And of course, Pearl Harbor was December prior to that. So things were different. Then people would move up on the position on the machine in a few months. That used to take them years to, because so many had gone off to war, of course.
Well, and a lot of manufacturing facilities in those days obviously were converted over from what they used to do to some new, task for the war effort. And was the paper mill, wrapping fruit something that they needed for the troops anyway? Or
I don't know that the paper mill did anything different.
yeah, maybe some
Because of
flyers
the war.
or something like that.
Yeah.
That well, they were just producing the paper. They weren't printing anything there.
Yeah,
So.
well, and we did napkins and toilet paper and various. It was called the largest specialty paper mill in the world, and all that meant was it was the largest paper mill that didn't publish newsprint for
Oh, wow.
newspapers. Although in a book I read that a friend gave me about Camas, it was founded by the Portland Oregonian
Oh,
as a
Supply.
source of
Yeah.
paper. And so it started out that way, and then it was Crown Willamette Company, part of Crown Cellarback.
wow. But then I don't know what I was going to ask you. So that was 42, and so you probably would have had classmates going off to the service. And
I did. And I went to Northwest Christian College, as it was then, and I was still 17, so I registered at the draft after I'd entered college. And they gave me a 4D classification, which was to study for ministry.
No.
And I debated whether to give that up and go in and messed around with that for a while, but I decided to stay and go to school. And so I was there 5 years, including 3 summer schools, and graduated from Northwest Christian College and the University of Oregon, because NCC was accredited in those years, and I needed some liberal arts and other things which they didn't offer that I'd get across the street at the U of O.
Yeah. And by then, and it was from there that you went to Union, is that?
I went to Union. A friend, a mentor, suggested I go to Union Theological Seminary in New York, which I'd never heard of. And I was raising questions. Of course, this was a rather conservative religious atmosphere. And I did a psychology major at the University of Oregon. I thought, if I can't be intellectually honest and still be in the ministry, I'll go into psychology or some helping profession like that. But when he suggested Union Seminary, and I found out about it and was able to get in, as he'd done his PhD at Columbia, and he said just living in New York would be the great experience of human relations, plus the fact at that time Union had some of the great theologians of the world, Reinhold Niebuhr and Paul Tillich and some people like that. So that was and I got married after graduating from the University of Oregon, and Lois and I had never been east of Boise, and I don't think she had either.
Right.
And we got on a plane and went to New York City, and boy, was that a culture shock.
I bet. Well, speaking of Niebuhr, I really liked your story about meeting Schweitzer. You got to tell that one.
Oh, yeah. Probably the most famous person I ever met was Albert Schweitzer. In 1948, Dr. and Mrs. Schweitzer came to Aspen, Colorado, and he received a Durkee Prize, I think it was. And he came back, they came back to New York on their way home. And friends of my Aunt Goldie, who had been a missionary in Belgian Congo for many years, Dr. and Mrs. Emery Ross, were in New York. And they kind of took Lois and me under their wing at the Park Avenue Christian Church, where I worked part-time. And so when the Schweitzers came, they had an open house for them 2 different nights. One night was for the religious type, and one was, I don't know whether the other was medical or music or both.
Yeah.
Because of course he was an outstanding organist as well as a physician.
Right.
And I knew that Schweitzer had written a book in, I think, 1906, and it wasn't translated to English till about 1909 or something, called The Quest of the Historical Jesus. And I didn't really know what it was all about, and I was having this class from Reinhold Niebuhr on Christian ethics, I think, and he had mentioned this book, and I don't think he quite approved of some of it at that time. And to make a little conversation, Lois visited with Mrs. Schweitzer and Mrs. Ross in English in the other room, and Dr. Schweitzer was speaking French, and so through my friend Emery Ross, who translated for us, I said, just to make conversation, I said, oh, Reinhold Niebuhr mentioned your book in class the other day. And he said, oh, what did he say? Well, I didn't understand exactly what he said, but I thought it was a little negative, and I said, oh, I forgot. One of my most embarrassing moments with Schweitzer was just so gracious that he just laughed out loud, and we all had a good time. Later I discovered it was that Schweitzer had really talked about Jesus as an apocalyptic person who was predicting the end times and so forth. And that was not very well accepted. Today it's pretty well accepted, except with different details, of course.
Yeah, well, and Niebuhr himself was no slouch, and I have that one photo in this one book of his of him lecturing to his class of eager young students, and you were in the front or second row, I think.
I was in the middle of this class in 1948. That was my first year at Union. There I was in my shirt with a long sleeve and a tie.
Yeah.
And I remembered photographers coming into class, and he was featured, several pictures in that book about him, but this one in class, but he was featured as Man of the Year by Time on their 25th anniversary issue.
Wow.
And we would go back to our room and check mail between classes, and there the mail on a Friday had the Time magazine, and somebody brought it back and held it up with a picture of Niebuhr on the front and a Hermanella ad or something on the back. He said, "I prefer the ham on the back."
The ham on the back. That's hilarious. And somewhere in there you met W.A. Welsh, was that right?
W.A. Welsh was a New Testament professor from Fried Divinity School at TCU. And Union was so ecumenical, there were so many people from different denominations, both students and faculty. There weren't a lot of my denomination, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And W.A. and Ruth were good to Lois and me. And one day, I don't remember whether they took us to church, but afterwards he was asking me all kinds of questions about where I was going to go. Well, I didn't know, but I wanted to be an associate minister because we didn't have internships in those years, and I wanted the experience. And I was planning to go to Portland to First Christian Church to be with Myron Cole. And we had made some conversation. W.A. was asking me all kinds of things about that. And then that day, Sunday, they voted to call him as the senior minister at the East Dallas Christian Church,
Wow.
where he'd done an interim. And so he asked me if I would go with him.
Yeah.
And he knew I had this other thing. Well, then the one in Portland didn't work out. The associate didn't quit like he was going to. And so I went to Dallas, or we went to Dallas from New York by way of Oregon, of course, and I was there for 2.5 years.
And what do you remember learning about, the experience that you wanted to gain being an associate? What kind of things did you pick up there?
Oh, I learned a lot of things. I was a youth minister, and incidentally, in my current church, I have a neighbor who goes to the same church I do now, Central Christian. He's 81, and he introduces me as his youth minister
Right.
in Dallas. W.A. would call me in sometimes before, like I was going to direct a summer conference and people like that, or just he knew he was an educator and he knew I wanted that, and he was very helpful in, and I'm sure I avoided a lot of mistakes that I might have made otherwise.
I think one story that I remember you telling me a long time ago, and I don't know why it comes back to me now, but it was something to do with the men in the congregation getting up to leave in the middle of the sermon, or just after the sermon, or something like that. Do you remember that? You told me about that.
In Dallas?
I thought it was in Dallas, and maybe it was some of the older ones, and you finally figured out that they had to go to the bathroom.
Frankly, I don't recall that.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that when I was a kid, and I thought that was pretty
Well,
funny.
it probably was true, and now that's my experience, so I can relate.
Absolutely, yeah. And so you were there how long?
There from September 1949. The seminary was a 3-year thing, but I did summer and winter. And so I went in September of 47 and left in August of 49. and went to Dallas in September. And then I finished my thesis and graduated with my class in 1950. And we left there in February of 1952 to go to Corvallis, Oregon.
Wow. Somewhere in there too, didn't you? You must have met Jim Coleman at Union, is that right?
Oh, Jim and Sue are our best friends at Union.
Yeah.
And we lived in a men's dormitory. It's a 6 or 7 story building, and the first 3 floors had been, after the war there were so many married students, had been converted to married students' quarters, but they just added another bathroom for the women. And Sue had grown up in the Christian church in Kentucky, and she and Lois met in the ladies' room, and she came out and said, "I finally met a Christian." And Jim was Presbyterian, and he'd been an Army infantry officer in World War II, so they were a little older than we. But they became our best friends there, and yeah, we visited them later in Augsburg, Germany, when he was stationed there later as a chaplain, and we kept up with them really till the end.
Yeah, but when you went back to Corvallis, did you, obviously we're getting up to the momentous point of having kids.
Right, yeah, you and Larry were born in Corvallis. We went there in February or March, I guess March of 1952.
Yeah.
And Larry was born in September of 53, and you were born in October of 56.
And did you like to live in the same house in Corvallis the whole
No,
time?
we did rentals.
Oh, uh-huh.
And so we started out renting half of a house. A lady and her daughter lived upstairs, and then we moved to an apartment where we were when Larry was born, which was a sort of a high-rise for there. And then we moved to another apartment complex. Oh, we lived 4 places, because then we rented a house again, and
Right.
Larry used to talk about our gray and pink house. It was a gray siding with pink decorations, as I recall.
Well, and I think that's the one place I don't mean I personally remember, but I remember it from stories or photos or something.
Yeah,
I remember seeing that house standing there in a black and white picture, and that was obviously Corvallis is home to Oregon State University, but that was kind of a coincidence. You were going to a church that didn't necessarily have any affiliation with the school, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. We had a campus ministry, and the campus minister was served like an associate minister to me at the First Christian Church in Corvallis.
I see, sure.
And that was a happy experience. We enjoyed it, and part of it was the post-war religious boom was on, and people were going to church as part of the culture. And so the church doubled in size in the 5 years we were there.
Wow.
And I thought it was because I was so smart, but I didn't.
I'm sure that contributed.
Yeah, well, I had made some contacts in Dallas again.
Right.
We had what we call visitation evangelism, and that fellow came to Oregon, and we used him, and we would add 60, 70 members on a particular Sunday or something.
Wow.
You know, I mean.
Unheard of now, right?
Well, oh, it is, and it would be inappropriate, and in some ways it may have been a little superficial.
Too fast.
But it was, as I say, it was the thing people did then. Right. And it's not the thing people do now.
Yeah. But, and so that was, yeah, it was from Corvallis to Phoenix, right? Or no, was there somewhere in between?
England.
Oh, yeah, I thought there was a gap. That's right. So
Yeah.
somewhere you got the notion, did somebody offer that to you in particular, or was it something you sought out?
No, they sought me out. I didn't know it. But we had British Churches of Christ that we were called, that we were affiliated with. part of the disciples. And they were a very small group. They had about 120 churches, but probably only about 20, 22 full-time ministers. And they ran by lay ministry and so forth, mostly. And since we had had, quote, good success in the States, they devised a plan in our headquarters in Indianapolis that they would recruit some young families, because they wanted to be not just a minister, but a whole family. And so I was asked, because of some contact I'd had, somebody knew me and recommended me if I would go. And we went in 1957 to Birmingham, England. You weren't a year old yet. And we're there for 3 years. And I tried some of the same procedures in England I did in Corvallis, and kind of ran into a stone wall because it was a different culture.
Well, it wasn't a growing community as much, right?
Well, it wasn't a growing community, and they'd been on a 7-day work week and all the war stuff and everything, and
wow.
And the church was no longer so much the center of their lives. They still had the established church and all of that, and that had some pros and cons about it. But it was a good experience, and I did a little studying at the University of Birmingham with a professor, Lamp, who later went to Cambridge, and I did a little teaching. We had a college as part of a group of small theological colleges in Birmingham. I'd ride my bicycle past the Cadbury chocolate factory
Nice.
to get there, or occasionally take the bus. And and one of the reasons I wanted to go, those days you didn't go to Europe at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is a chance to get there. I have a little bit of a missionary impulse, but not enough to take me out to the Congo or something.
Right.
And so I thought it was a combination, and it, you know, again, we were homesick because things we took for granted in this country, like supermarkets and central heating and
Yeah.
air conditioning and automobiles and things like that, we didn't have.
Well, I remember hearing that didn't you have to carry the hot water upstairs for the bathtub?
No, there was a heater up there, but we had to put a coin in it to heat it for the bath.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yeah, a shilling coin, I think, was what we used. And we had several coal fire things, little grates, but we did add an electric heater for the morning room, as we called it, where we ate, and the kitchen right there.
Yeah. Wow. But then, as you said, you know, you got to go see Jim and Sue in Germany and some other trips like that while you were over there.
We did, and there were some others. There was a couple, a family in London that went over the same time we did. And I was going down there to speak at an evening dinner for something, and so I just took a train an hour earlier to get to London because Prince Andrew had just been born.
Wow.
And I wanted to go by Buckingham Palace, which I did. And here was a notice about his health and his mother's health. And,
Wow.
and I saw the crowd move a little bit, and I said to the policeman, "What's happening?" He said, "Oh, Prince Philip is going to come out soon on his way to a cricket match." So we moved over to the gates, and they opened, and here came this old Jaguar, as they called it, with him sitting in the back waving to people.
Wow.
You know, so I mean, there were experiences like that I could fill several tapes with that were valuable in our time over there.
I don't know if I think I told you this, but after I took our family over there and we were riding to the airport in one of those London cabs,
Yeah.
and said something to the guy about having lived there when I was a child, and oh, where did you live? And I said Birmingham, and he almost stopped the car because he said I was the first American he'd ever heard pronounce it right.
Right, right.
Because I'd heard you say it that way.
Yeah, you almost said Birmingham. I mean, it almost ran it all into one extended syllable.
Yeah, exactly.
But no ham on the end, right?
But that was quite a transition to go from, you know, the English climate to the desert in Phoenix, Arizona in 1960, right?
You're right. You're right. You and Larry played outside more of that first winter in Phoenix than you did in England. But,
Wow.
yeah.
And this was after, and I remember too, you bought the Renault car there.
Before we left, I wanted to take a little car so we could drive back across the country. And we bought the little Renault Dauphine, ordered it at the factory. Well, I had lived in England long enough, I couldn't bring it back in there without paying an exorbitant tax.
So,
So we ordered it at the factory. We flew over to Paris. I think we flew that time from Birmingham. And then we did the Paris thing and took an American Express tour out to Versailles and that sort of thing.
with two little kids, yeah.
Yeah, with two. And enjoyed that. And then went out to the factory to pick up this little car. And it was a holiday weekend. We call it Pentecost, they call it Whitsuntide. And that just meant having, in that area, that was a holiday, you took an extra day off. Well, instead of getting the car in the morning, it was 6 o'clock in the evening, and I started driving across Paris
Wow.
with you and Larry and your mother, and went back to the hotel and got our luggage, and then we headed on out into some distance into France, where another chaplain and his wife, Arnie Porter, and Dorothy lived with their family, an Air Force chaplain
Right.
at Toul-Rosières. That was before, can't say the president of France and those, de Gaulle,
De Gaulle.
kicked out all the American troops, you know.
Wow.
And then we took that on the trip. We went with Arnie and Dorothy and their family several places, and to Geneva and some other places. And then we took off and went down the Rhone River.
The country with, you know, two.
Drive it, and then the vineyards and all that sort of thing, you know. Beautiful, beautiful countryside.
Wow.
And on into...
How'd you get the car from Europe to?
Had